Well, having reported from the ground in Bondi since Sunday night, I can attest that the former Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg, has channeled the anger of the Jewish community with a blistering attack on a seemingly flat-footed Prime Minister Anthony Albanese. Joining us live now is the former Treasurer, Josh Frydenberg. Josh, it's good to see you this morning. So let's start off with that site at Bondi where Julia is at the moment and where we've been all week. You were there yesterday. You were visibly emotional. What was going through your head at that time?
I was thinking of the loss of life, rabbis, Holocaust survivors, and of course the beautiful 10-year-old Matilda, whose family came from Ukraine and chose the name Matilda because it was the most Australian name they could think of. And I was holding a little book about Matilda when I had tears in my eyes. So it was a very difficult, emotional day. But as I said in my press conference, Pete, I was there not just to mourn, I was there to warn. And now is the time for accountability and action, because this horrible event, the most deadliest terrorist attack in Australia's history, was all too predictable. And we had a government that ignored the warning signs. And now, if they do not act, we will see a repeat of terrorism in our country. And their first and their fundamental duty is to protect and safeguard their citizens, and that has not been happening to date.
You mentioned yesterday, Josh, that there should be a royal commission into anti-Semitism. Tony Burke has said he doesn't want the delay of one. Your response to that?
Well, Tony Burke has been delaying for 2.5 years, and I don't know what he's afraid of in terms of what a royal commission would find out. What warnings did the government have? What could have it done to have prevented that event last Sunday, the Bondi massacre? Unfortunately, Australia has a Home Affairs Minister in Tony Burke who is weak, who is full of excuses, and Australia needs a Home Affairs Minister who is strong and who is full of solutions. The role of the Home Affairs Minister is to provide safety and security to Australians, but through Tony Burke's actions we have become less safe, more unsafe. And so I call on Tony Burke, I call on the Prime Minister to step up and to take the necessary action. Australians are coming up to me wherever I am. You're hearing them on your program. We saw them yesterday at Bondi, and they're asking the question, if the Prime Minister, our Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, cannot lead us in a crisis, how can he lead us out of a crisis? And we are in a crisis because Australia has been radicalised on his watch. And ever since the hours after October the 7th, 2023, we've seen escalating hate in our country, intimidation and violence on the Jewish community. And the attack at Bondi was an attack on the Jewish community, but it's a threat to every Australian. And the radical Islamist ideology that was responsible for that attack at Bondi was also responsible for the death and the murder of 88 Australians at Bali and the murder of Australians at the Lindsay Cafe, and of course the murder of many, many people around the world in other terrorist attacks. So we need to take on these hate breaches. We need to ban these organisations like Hizb ut-Tahrir. We need to prosecute those who are inciting violence. We need to stop the protests long after the ceasefire has been reached in the Middle East. We need to take more action at our universities. We need to strengthen our immigration program. We need to invest in education, in giving people the tools to understand the complexities of the Middle East and the lessons of the Holocaust. We need a royal commission, and we need the government to get off its backside and actually respond to the Prime Minister's own special envoy on anti-Semitism, who provided a report to them, to Tony Burke and to the Prime Minister more than 150 days ago. A roadmap, a framework, a series of initiatives, none of which have been acted upon in the way they needed to be in the 150 plus days that the Prime Minister has had that report sitting on his desk.
So I think I know what you're going to say to this, because I've been asking this question to the government and I know what the response has been. But when members of the government, whether it's Tony Burke, Prime Minister, we even had it from Matt Thistlethwaite this morning, when they say, well, we've actually implemented more policies to combat anti-Semitism than any other government in history, and it's promising to do more now, what's your response to that?
They're delusional. They're not just naive, they're reckless. We've just had the most deadly terrorist attack in Australia's history. The greatest loss of Jewish life anywhere in the world. outside of the State of Israel since October the 7th. And for the last 2.5 years, we've seen people inciting violence, spreading their hate, and they've been doing it without sanction. And the Prime Minister, who's supposed to sit as the first among equals in our government, who is supposed to lead the premiers and his own ministers to the best possible positions on these issues, he's nowhere to be seen. And it's not what I want. I want a Prime Minister who is standing up to be counted, who can go to the funerals, who can go down to Bondi, who can provide the solutions, who can act with a sense of urgency that this issue needs. And we are fighting for the soul of Australia. Make no mistake, we are fighting for the soul of Australia, because when anti-Semitism moves from the shameful fringe to the public square, and there is no more public square than Bondi Beach in Australia, when it moves there, it's a sign of a decay across society, and it's a sign, it's a massive warning sign to us all that more action is required urgently. When
you say, and it's a really powerful point, this is now a battle for the soul of Australia. Is that a reflection on the events of Sunday night in terms of it not just being an attack on the Jewish community, but also being an attack on the Australian way of life?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, when Jewish kids go to school, they're surrounded by armed guards. When you visit a Jewish person aged care centre, there are armed guards. When you take kids now to Jewish sporting clubs, there are police cars that are present. I mean, how is that the lucky country? How is that the Australian way of life, Pete? It's not. And we've just seen people gunned down with automatic weapons, 10-year-olds shot on Bondi Beach, our national icon. We saw another national icon at Sydney Harbour Bridge desecrated when people were waving ISIS and Hamas and Hezbollah flags and saying death to the IDF. And then, of course, we saw the desecration hours after October the 7th on the steps of another national icon, our Opera House, when people, were celebrating the death and the destruction that was caused by Hamas. How is this in any way consistent with the democratic ideals of Australia? How is that in any way consistent with our way of life? We have a right to live in this country free of that intimidation and hate and harassment, and we aren't. And if the Prime Minister's not going to take actions to rectify the situation, who will? Who can? And that's why responsibility rests at his door, and that is why now is the time. And it's way too late for those who have already lost their lives, but it's not too late for the rest of us. Yeah. Now is the time for the Prime Minister to step up.
So, Josh, you might be aware that police in the UK have overnight said that they'll be making arrests if slogans or chants of globalise the Intifada are seen or heard on the streets. Do you think the same policy should be adopted here?
Of course. It's not even a question that is open to interpretation. It's an obvious answer. Globalise the Intifada is what happened on Bondi Beach. Globalises the Intifada is what happens when there's bus bombings, across Israel, right? And when people are shot in cafes and in pizzerias, right? That's globalising the Intifada, killing people, right? Just like when you call from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free, you're calling for the destruction of the State of Israel, even though most people saying it don't know which river and which sea. Right? And the Prime Minister agreed that that was a very violent statement that had no role and no place on our streets, yet he's done nothing to stop that. And when you chant death to the IDF across our Sydney Harbour Bridge, you should be arrested for that too. Because when we see this language, this incitement, it ultimately leads to violence. They're not my words. That's what the head of ASIO has said, the person chosen by the Prime Minister to inform him, to direct him, to educate him on the threats to Australia's safety and security. And so, yes, of course, that needs to be done, but it's not enough. We need to tackle the hate. And as I said, it might have been guns that stole the lives of 15 Australians, including little Matilda, but it's actually the radical Islamist ideology that pulled the trigger. And that's where the Prime Minister needs to step up. That's where he needs to take action. He can no longer dismiss it. Australia has a great stain on it, and it's happened on his watch as a result of the loss of life in the Bondi massacre.
Do you think he's listening now? Do you think his government is listening now?
I can only hope so, because if he doesn't listen, if he doesn't act, then you and I and all your viewers are less safe. And so ultimately, I can't pass laws. I'm not in Parliament. You can ask questions, but you can't pass laws because you're not in Parliament. He is. He's assumed the office. He's reached the highest office of Prime Minister. He's the first among equals. It's his chance. It's his responsibility. It's his obligation to take the necessary steps. I can tell you, ordinary Australians, everyday Australians want this. They want more action. They are now awake. But if the government is still asleep, then we will be less safe as a result.
Do you want to be in Parliament now, Josh, to continue to drive this message?
Pete, I have made no decisions about my political future because the next election is 2.5 years away. But what I will do from now until my last breath is to advocate for better policies, for stronger policies, to protect all Australians. Because if I, as the former Treasurer, if I, as an Australian Jew who has been subject to this hate and to this prejudice, if I don't use my voice, who will? And if I don't use my voice now, when would I? And so now is the time. Now is the time.